The soldier came home from war to find that his house, and the life it contained, had been reduced to nothing but ash and secrets. The taxi's brakes hissed, a sound that sliced through the quiet afternoon air of Oak Creek. It was a civilian sound, soft and forgiving, a world away from the metallic shriek of troop carriers. Staff Sergeant Elias Thorne paid the driver, the worn dollar bills feeling flimsy and unreal in his hand. For 18 months, his world had been defined by the weight of a rifle, the grit of sand in his teeth, and the unrelenting glare of a foreign sun. He swung the duffel bag from the trunk onto his shoulder. The weight was familiar, a ghost of the 70-pound pack he'd carried through mountain passes and dusty villages. But this bag was different. It carried no ammunition, no rations, only uniforms he hoped to never wear again and a few carefully wrapped souvenirs for his wife, Sarah. It was a bag of homecoming, not of war. The air smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and freshly cut grass, a perfume so potent it made his chest ache. He had dreamed of this smell. In the choking dust of Kandahar, he had summoned the memory of it to remind himself of what he was fighting for. Home. He started the walk, the last half-mile. He'd told Sarah his flight was tomorrow, wanting to surprise her, to see the unprepared look of joy on her face. He pictured it perfectly. He'd slip the key in the lock, the same key he'd carried on his dog tags, and find her in the kitchen, maybe humming to the radio, surrounded by the warm, cluttered life they had built together. The street was exactly as he remembered it. Mr. Henderson's prize-winning roses still climbed the white picket fence on the corner. The miller's old station wagon was parked in its usual spot, a little rustier than before. Each familiar detail was a balm on his frayed nerves, smoothing over the hypervigilance that had become his second nature. He was unlearning the war with every step. Scan the rooftops. No, just look at the oak tree, its branches heavy with summer leaves. Assess the windows. No, just see the curtains, the signs of life within. He turned the final corner onto Maple Drive, a smile already forming on his lips. He lifted his gaze to number 214, the small blue house with the porch swing he'd built himself. But it wasn't there. His brain refused to process the image. Where his home should have been, there was only a black, gaping wound in the earth. A skeletal foundation, choked with charred timber and debris, sat under an indifferent sky. The blue siding was gone, the porch swing was gone, the roof that had sheltered him was gone. Yellow caution tape, faded and sagging, cordoned off the wreckage. It fluttered weakly in the breeze, a final, pathetic warning. Elias stopped dead in the middle of the sidewalk. The duffel bag, which had felt so light with hope, suddenly became an impossible burden, its strap digging into his shoulder like a vice. His heart hammered against his ribs, not with fear, but with a profound, shattering confusion. His training kicked in, an automatic, useless reflex. He scanned the perimeter. Assessed the damage. Structural integrity compromised. Total loss. The words were clinical, detached. They belonged to an after-action report, not the ruins of his life. He walked forward slowly, his boots crunching on something on the sidewalk. He looked down. It was glass, shattered and spread like glittering sand. A window, blown outward. The smell he'd identified as damp asphalt was something else entirely. It was the smell of cold ash, of deep, ruinous fire. He ducked under the tape, his movements stiff and robotic. He stepped onto the concrete slab that had once been his porch. Here, he had kissed Sarah goodbye. Here, he had promised he would come back. He had kept his promise. But the place he had promised to return to no longer existed. He saw fragments of their life in the wreckage. The twisted metal frame of their bed. A blackened porcelain shard that might have been one of Sarah's favorite plates. The melted, unrecognizable lump of what was once their television, where they'd curled up to watch movies on rainy Sundays. Each object was an accusation. Where was Sarah? Was she safe? Was she hurt? A cold dread, far sharper than anything he'd felt in combat, coiled in his gut. An enemy you can see is one thing. An enemy that takes everything while you're gone is another. He backed away from the wreckage, his mind a storm of questions. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Sarah's name. But he couldn't press it. What would he even say? Hi, honey, I'm home. By the way, where's our home? A screen door creaked open from the house next door. Mrs. Gable, a woman with hair like cotton and eyes that had seen 70 years of Maple Drive's history, stood on her porch, clutching a cardigan around her frail shoulders. "Elias," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "Dear Lord, is that you?" He turned, feeling like a ghost. "Mrs. Gable." Her face was a canvas of pity and shock. "We didn't know, no one told us you were coming home." "It was a surprise," he said, the words tasting like ash. "What happened?" She wrung her hands, her gaze flicking from his face to the charred pit next door and back again. "Oh, you poor boy. The fire. It was about 2 months back. In the middle of the night. It went up so fast." "Was Sarah?" He couldn't finish the sentence. "She's safe," the old woman said quickly, and Elias felt a fraction of the tension in his shoulders release. "She's all right. Got out with just the clothes on her back. She's been staying at a little apartment over on the west side. Said she couldn't bear to stay on this street." He nodded, absorbing the information. Safe. That was the mission objective. Secure the asset. But Sarah wasn't an asset, she was his wife. And she had been alone through this. "An accident?" Elias asked, his voice low. "A gas leak. Faulty wiring." Mrs. Gable hesitated, her eyes clouding with something she didn't want to say. The fire chief, he didn't think so. They had investigators out here for weeks. Talking about accelerants. The word hung in the air between them. Accelerants. Arson. Someone had done this. Someone had deliberately torched his home. "She has the address written down for you," Mrs. Gable added softly. "Sarah. She gave it to me. She said, if Elias comes looking, if he comes here first, give him this. She knew you'd come here." The apartment was in a drab, 3-story building that smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage. It was the kind of place people ended up when their lives had taken a wrong turn. He knocked on the door of 2B, his knuckles rapping against cheap, peeling paint. He heard a faint shuffling inside, then the click of a lock. The door opened a few inches, held by a chain. Sarah's face appeared in the gap. She looked smaller than he remembered. Thinner. The light in her eyes, the one he had carried in his memory like a talisman, was gone. It was replaced by a haunted, exhausted fear. She wasn't the woman he had left. She was a survivor of a different kind of war. "Elias," she breathed, her voice cracking. The chain rattled as her hand trembled. "Sarah." She fumbled with the lock and pulled the door open. For a moment, they just stood there, separated by a chasm far wider than the worn threshold. He wanted to pull her into his arms, to hold her and tell her it was all okay, that he was home now and he would fix it. But the sight of the burned-out house was seared into his mind. The word accelerants echoed in the silence. He stepped inside. The apartment was sparse, furnished with mismatched, second-hand items. A lumpy sofa, a card table with 2 chairs. A single box of possessions sat in the corner, a pathetic testament to what she had managed to save. It wasn't a home. It was a holding cell. "You're early," she whispered, not looking at him. She was looking at his duffel bag, at the proof that the life she'd been living was over. "My flight got moved up," he lied. "The house, Sarah. What in God's name happened?" Tears welled in her eyes and streamed down her cheeks. She didn't sob. It was a silent, weary weeping, as if she had no energy left for noise. "I'm so sorry, Eli. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what? Did someone do this to us?" His voice was harder than he intended, the staff sergeant bleeding through. "Who was it? You need to tell me." "It's not that simple," she choked out, wrapping her arms around herself. "It is that simple," he insisted, his frustration mounting. He took a step closer. "We were targeted." "Why? Tell me, Sarah. I can handle it. Just give me a direction to point myself." "There is no one to point at," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She finally met his eyes, and what he saw there terrified him. It was shame. Deep, bottomless shame. "What does that mean?" he asked, though a cold, sickening suspicion was already beginning to form in his gut. He thought back on the last year. The strained phone calls. The vague answers about their finances. He'd chalked it up to the stress of his deployment, the bad connection. He'd been wrong. They weren't bad connections. They were evasions. It means I did it, Eli, she confessed, the words tumbling out in a rush of misery. I did it. I burned it down. The world tilted. The four walls of the tiny apartment seemed to press in on him, squeezing the air from his lungs. He felt the floor drop out from under him, a dizzying plunge into an abyss he never knew existed. He sank onto the lumpy sofa, the frame groaning under his weight. Why? The word was a dry rasp. Sarah collapsed onto the floor, her body folding in on itself with grief. The debt, she cried. Oh, God, the debt. It started small. The car broke down. Then the furnace went out. Big things. I didn't want to worry you. You had enough to worry about over there. I thought I could handle it. He stared at the cracked plaster on the wall, seeing nothing. He had sent most of his pay home. It should have been enough. I took out a loan, she continued, her voice muffled by her hands. Just a small one, from one of those online places. The interest, it was insane. I couldn't keep up. So I took another to pay for the first one. It was like drowning. Every time I thought I was getting my head above water, another wave would pull me under. He remembered his duty. To protect. He had been on the other side of the world, protecting strangers, while his own wife was drowning right here. The irony was a physical blow. They started calling, she said. Not the bank. The other people. The ones from the second loan. They weren't nice, Eli. They threatened things. They knew where I lived. They knew I was alone. His hands clenched into fists. An enemy. There was an enemy after all. Nameless, faceless predators who had cornered his wife. The insurance policy, she whispered, her voice laced with self-loathing. That's all I could think of. Our fire insurance. It had a clause for total loss. Enough to pay them off. Enough to get out from under it all. I was so scared. I felt so trapped. I just wanted it to be over. She described the night of the fire in disjointed, horrified fragments. The gasoline can from the garage. The trembling hands. The sickening whoosh of the flames catching. The desperate flight into the night as the sirens grew closer. Elias didn't feel anger. Not yet. That would come later. Right now, all he felt was a profound, hollowing sorrow. The life he had been fighting to get back to was a lie. A beautiful, fragile lie that had shattered while he was gone. He hadn't been protecting a home. He had been protecting a memory. She looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and mascara. I know what you must think of me, she said. I'm a criminal. I destroyed everything. He saw not a criminal, but a casualty. A non-combatant wounded on the home front. He had been trained to assess threats, to neutralize them. But what did you do when the threat was a system, and the victim was the person you loved most in the world? The next day, Elias went to see the fire chief. Tom Miller was a man built like a barrel, with a graying flat top and hands that had seen 1,000 fires. He was also a Vietnam vet, a fact the whole town knew. His office at the fire station smelled of stale coffee and responsibility. Thorne, Miller said, rising from his desk to shake Elias's hand. The grip was firm, knowing. Heard you were back. I'm sorry about your house, son. Truly. I came to ask about the investigation, Elias said, sitting in the chair Miller offered. Miller leaned back, his expression unreadable. It's officially closed. Unofficially, it's just, unresolved. Mrs. Gable mentioned arson. The lab confirmed it. High-temperature accelerants, poured in a classic pattern to gut the place fast. This wasn't an accident, Miller's eyes, clear and direct, held his. We look at a lot of things in a case like this. Motive is a big one. We ran the financials. We know about the debt. We know about the predatory loans. A cold knot tightened in Elias's stomach. They knew. We know your wife was the sole occupant, Miller continued, his voice even. We also know she had no history of trouble. Not so much as a parking ticket. A good person pushed into a bad corner. Elias said nothing. He just waited. Here's the thing about proof, son, Miller said, leaning forward and resting his thick arms on the desk. I need more than a strong suspicion to ruin someone's life, especially the wife of a soldier who was serving his country. I need a confession. I need a witness. I don't have either. All I have is a woman who lost everything and a story that doesn't quite add up. So the case is closed. Inconclusive. Elias felt a surge of gratitude so intense it almost buckled him. But I didn't call you in here to talk about the case, Miller said, his tone shifting. It was softer now. I called you in here to talk to you. Vet to vet, he tapped a finger on a framed photo on his desk. It was a picture of a young man in army greens, his face taut with the same tension Elias saw in his own reflection. When I came back, Miller said quietly, I thought the war was over. But it wasn't. The fighting stopped, but the war came home with me. And it came home for my wife, too. She fought her own battles while I was gone. Loneliness. Fear. Things breaking that she had to fix alone. They don't give out medals for that. He looked directly at Elias. Your wife fought a war, son. She just lost. Don't you dare hold it against her that her enemy was different than yours. Your job now isn't to be a judge. It's to be a husband. Your mission has changed, Sergeant. It's time to come home. For real. Elias walked out of the fire station feeling like a different man. The rage and confusion had receded, replaced by a quiet, aching clarity. Miller hadn't just given him an out, he had given him a new mission directive. He went back to the apartment. Sarah was sitting on the sofa, staring at the wall. The unopened box was still in the corner. She looked up as he entered, her face braced for a verdict. He didn't say a word. He walked over, knelt in front of her, and took her hands in his. They were cold. The insurance company is going to pay out, he said softly. It wasn't a question. Miller had all but confirmed it. She flinched. I don't want it. It's blood money. No, he said, his grip firming on her hands. It's not. It's restitution. We're going to take every cent, and we're going to pay back every person you owe. The bank, the credit cards, even the monsters who scared you. We're going to wipe the slate clean. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of disbelief. We. Yes, we, he said. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry I wasn't here. I left you to fight a battle alone, and that's a failure of command. My failure. He finally pulled her into his arms, and she clung to him, her body shaking with months of pent-up fear and grief. He held her, smelling the scent of her hair, feeling the fragile beat of her heart against his chest. He was home. Not in the blue house on Maple Drive. That was just a building. He was home right here, in this shabby apartment, holding the ruins of their old life in his arms. 6 months later, Elias stood on a patch of fresh-cut sod, hammering a "for sale" sign into the ground. The lot on Maple Drive was cleared, clean, and ready for a new family to build new memories. They had sold it to a young couple, using the money as a down payment on a small, 2-bedroom condo on the other side of town. The insurance money had come through. As promised, they had used it to methodically erase their debt, sending cashier's checks to every creditor until the slate was wiped clean. What little was left over went into a savings account, a foundation for a future built on honesty, not desperation. Elias had a new job, working for a construction crew. He spent his days building things instead of breaking them. He came home tired, covered in sawdust instead of desert dust, and found peace in the simple act of creating something new. The work was hard, but it was honest. He drove home to the condo. Sarah was in the kitchen, and the smell of roasting chicken filled the small space. She smiled when she saw him, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a quiet strength he admired more than he could say. They weren't the same people they were before the war, before the fire. The naive joy of their past was gone, burned away with the blue house. In its place was something harder, more resilient. Something tested by fire and not consumed. He went to the window and looked out. There was no porch swing, no prize-winning roses. Just a simple view of a parking lot and a shared green space. But it was theirs. It was real. He had left for war to protect his home. He had returned to find it in ashes, only to learn his mission had been wrong all along. Home wasn't a place you defended. It was a thing you built, day by day, together. And his work had just begun.